you. Now it is my great honor to introduce Dr. Robert Krell. The list of his accomplishments fills many pages, and I'm not going to recite them all, but suffice it to say that he is a child survivor of the Shoah, a child psychiatrist with a very distinguished career as a professor of psychiatry, as well as a clinician. He is the founder of the Holocaust Education Center in Vancouver, and a distinguished writer and researcher. Also a founding member of the World Federation of Jewish Child Survivors and the Second Generation. Listening to his speech at a conference in Montreal back in 1994 was an experience that so impressed me that it set me off on my own course of speaking out and writing my history. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Krell.
Dear friends, it is an honor to have been asked to address you. It is also my duty. In a Kristallnacht address in Vancouver on November 1981, I stated the following: the duty consists not only of commemorating an event which signaled an enormous impending tragedy for the Jewish people, but also to remind you of the need for greater effort and action. It is not enough that Jews and non-Jewish friends gather together to commemorate without a commitment to breaking the continuing silence concerning anti-Semitism. It's 1981. The shattering of glass so many years ago did not arouse a complacent world to the action that was required. And today, all around us, we face contemporary Kristallnachts observed and ignored by a watchful but silent world. 1981. Scenes of horror and destruction continue to unfold in a manner entirely predictable for those of us who have witnessed and or studied the Holocaust. Remember, these words were offered in 1981, 43 years ago. I continued. I suppose what always puzzles us is that Jews in Israel occupy a central position in world affairs while constituting less than 0.5% of the world's population. Israel itself is only a sliver of land, smaller than Vancouver Island, whose inhabitants number no more, at that time, than 4 million Israeli Jews, and of those 500,000 are Israeli Arabs. Today's numbers are approximately 9 million, including over 2.1 million Arabs. And yet Jewish life permeates the world far out of proportion to size and numbers. It is not Jewish influence or power or conspiracy as anti-Semites would suggest. It is probably the consequence of a collective tradition which enriches Jewish life to the extent that the traditions bind each Jew to the other in an extended family with common cultural ties, religious ties, shared languages, its culture, its accomplishments, its historic dimensions, and above all, of its capacity to survive its enemies. Even after the Holocaust, there were constant reminders of the precariousness of Jewish life. In Poland, immediately post-war, there were pogroms murdering the few Jews who had survived. New anti-Semitic campaigns were initiated and Jews fled the country. The remaining Jews in Poland numbered approximately 10,000 to 20,000 members. Where once lived 3.3 million Jews, there are virtually none. Poland demonstrated that a country did not require the presence of Jews to remain anti-Semitic. In France, Jew hatred has long been a way of life. On Friday night, October 3rd, 1980, a synagogue on the Rue Copernic was attacked with explosives. The Prime Minister Raymond Barre remarked about the attack, expressing regret that although the criminals intended to kill Jews, they killed innocent Frenchmen instead. In Canada, more subtle perhaps, less violent. I will get to Canada. In the meantime, the United Nations proclaimed that Zionism equals racism resolution in 1975. In 1981, the United Nations spent 1/3 of its time on the, in quotes, sins of racist Israel, in quotes. The UN never once denounced the PLO, not for the murder of Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics, not for the massacre of a busload of tourists, nor a group of Jewish children on an outing in Israel. In a talk to child Holocaust survivors in Los Angeles in 1983, I quoted Erwin Kotler, a former president of Canadian Jewish Congress, then a Minister of Justice of Canada, and more recently the founder of the Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. He stated in a public address in Vancouver, "These are difficult days in the history of the Jewish people and in the human condition as a whole. The Jewish people, as we move through the 80s, are people that alone, they stand at the bar, indicted at the bar of mankind. People who it is sought once again to portray as a pariah people beyond the pale, as being anti-human in the same way it was sought in Kristallnacht to portray the Jews as being an inferior race." Why do I focus on the 1980s? To demonstrate that there was no respite from the vestiges of Jew hatred. We were aware of Bert Zundel, Malcolm Ross, James Keekstra, Doug Christie, Eileen Pressler, Doug Collins, as well as the presence in Canada of thousands of Nazi immigrants who were neither vetted nor prosecuted. I talked with Simon Wiesenthal, who told me that he handed 10 files of Nazi war criminals to the Attorney General of Canada. I talked to that Attorney General of Canada to ask him where they were. He said they were passed to the RCMP and lost. The notion that we have had a 60-year or so respite from anti-Semitism is false. Jewish successes have gone to our heads. The degradations that paved the way for the Holocaust has been and is being repeated. Delegitimization has become the code word, the organizing frame of reference with which the Jewish people are filtered and evaluated and judged. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz has said, "The Jewish people are the only people in the world today whose defamation is increasingly coming to receive the sanction of public international law." In hiding for 3.5 years with Dutch Gentiles, Albert and Violetta Manneke and their 10-year-old daughter Nora, I was reunited with my parents in May 1945, a miracle. Most Dutch Jewish children who made it were orphaned. I am a child of the Holocaust. No day of my life passes without a reminder of those times. Not a day is free from the Shoah. No night passes without a dream. I, who do not speak Yiddish, often dream in Yiddish. In 1951, Leo and Emmy Krell Nov, age 10, emigrated to Canada. In 1961, I returned to Holland and I visited my Dutch Christian family, the angels of my life. As I knocked on the door, one of 4 on the first floor, a neighbor opened his. "Robbie, is that you?" "Yes, meneer de Vries." "Here to see your mother?" "Of course." "Robbie, I was deeply disappointed in you." "What do you mean, meneer de Vries?" "You never thanked me for not betraying you." I I was 5 years old when I was liberated. He was waiting for an apology, I guess. That summer of 1961, I traveled to Israel, and in Jerusalem, an elder Rebbe took me to the Eichmann trial. On my way to Israel in 1969, the plane TWA 840 was hijacked by the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We were told the plane would be blown up. That did not happen until we had landed in a patch of sand near an incomplete Damascus airport. Just after we had scrambled in the plane, that's when they blew off the front of it. We were released after 2 days and flown to Athens. All passengers except for 11 Israelis, of whom 2 men were held for 99 days. I continued on to Israel, and so that was the life of one young Jew in today's world. Nazis, PLO, and neighbors. The results of all this was for me to become a reluctant activist, by nature and perhaps from hiding, publicity shy. I forced myself to speak. Organized Holocaust Symposia for high school students in 1976. Founded an audiovisual testimony project in 1978, probably the first in North America. Spearheaded the building of a Holocaust memorial at the Sharat Tzedek Cemetery for survivors to be able to say Kaddish. That was done in 1987. And then founded the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center that opened in 1994 and teaches 25,000 children every year, in which I served as its founding president. I worked quietly. My 2021 memoir is titled Sounds from Silence. Although I am a psychiatrist, I did not examine my own motivation. That was partially clarified for me by Elie Wiesel. If you don't know who he is, he was an Auschwitz survivor. At about age 16 and a half, he was liberated at Buchenwald. And by 1986, was awarded the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize. He said, and I paraphrase, "The murder of 1.5 million Jewish children was meaningless. Who could imagine such a slaughter? To what purpose? It has no meaning. Therefore, we must confer meaning on it." Perhaps that's what I was trying to do. Then October 7, 2023, precisely 80 years earlier, I was still in hiding. When I was reunited so miraculously with my parents, my education began and I learned about Auschwitz. I continued to learn in my 30s by the world's greatest expert on Auschwitz, Rudolf Verba, who had spent 21 months there before his escape with Alfred Wetzler, only 2 of 5 Jews to do so. They wrote the Auschwitz protocols, which eventually saved 120,000 Budapest Jews. Rudy worked and taught at UBC in the Department of Pharmacological Sciences, located next to the Health Sciences Center Hospital Department of Psychiatry. We developed an activist relationship first, then a friendship, in which he would tell me, amongst other things, of his work as a slave laborer in the compound named Kavala, with a K. He told me that it was filled with possessions taken from arriving Jews. Robert, he said, it was Europe's largest fur store. We inmates thought of Canada as a land of abundance, so we named the compound Canada. Yes, indeed, Canada was in the minds of the inmates who labored there. Canada was in Auschwitz. From that knowledge, I learned to warn my audiences, adults and students, do not bring Auschwitz into Canada. On October 7, 2023, Hamas brought Auschwitz to Israel. Their massacre of innocent Israeli citizens, including over 300 young people at a music festival celebrating peace, resulted in the gruesome death of 1,200 people and the capture of 250 hostages. It was Kristallnacht writ large. The rapes, beheadings, and burning of living children, all after the most vicious tortures, were filmed and distributed. While the Nazis had done their evil work largely in the dark and with great secrecy, Hamas committed its atrocities in the light of day with great pride. Was I shocked by what happened? Of course. But sadly, I could believe it. I could believe it only for knowing what was done to us before. What I could not believe was October 8, 2023. I could not believe that there was no condemnation from the feminist movements of the brutalities committed against Israeli women. I could not believe that celebrations had begun across our country. A celebration of pure evil transformed into a liberation movement? How was it possible? How was it possible that university students, supported by their professors, vilified Israel even before its retaliation in Gaza, which was inevitable? Israel must defend itself. Where was our government? They bought into casual reports from Hamas, warned Israel against a disproportionate response, and allowed demonstrations targeting Jewish businesses, community centers, and individuals. Kristallnacht was here. Auschwitz had come. And the perpetrators hid behind masks to proclaim their freedom of speech rights while urging the elimination of the State of Israel and any Jews who happen to support its right to exist. Who is advocating genocide? And who, again, are its intended victims? Dear friends, encampments represent the earliest arrival of Auschwitz on Canadian soil. The seedlings are here now. They are planted in the minds of incredibly undereducated young people who have been fed propaganda that defies imagination to those who know more. Having learned slogans of lies and deception, they are able to not only chant them, but believe them unconditionally. Medical students at UBC, over 250 of them, signed a petition that included bizarre accusations beginning with labeling Israel a colonial settler state. Medical students are taught to examine a patient's condition very thoroughly and thoughtfully, often consulting with others and thinking about it for hours or days. But this they could handle in a few seconds. In only a moment, they signed a petition that made them into cheerleaders for Hamas. Here is how I concluded my Kristallnacht speech back in 1981 with a quote from international lawyer Samuel Pizar, a Holocaust survivor who spoke at the Knesset at the 1981 World Gathering of Holocaust Survivors in Jerusalem. Here is a small excerpt from his speech. We have a unique legacy to hand to our fellow men, Jews and non-Jews, especially to the young, because our message of blood and hope is not about the past, but about the future that belongs to them. Perhaps those who cheated death the way we did, and then learned to savor the intoxicating luxury of freedom, are fated to live out their days without an outer skin. But sometimes, at moments of dark premonition, we see the new images of religious fanaticism, racial hatred, terrorist violence, and gathering mushroom clouds, a vision of doomsday. At such times, against our profound commitment to calm reason, against our love of life, against our confidence in man, we feel as though in that indescribable period when a burst of slogans and bombs shattered our homes, our families, our happiness, and our minds, we experienced what was yet to come. This was spoken in 1981. And as a child of the Holocaust, I also know it is far from over. What does this most recent version of warning that Auschwitz is about to return mean for us? I hope it signals the end of complacency and moral blindness. I see no difference in our status in the world, for too many people prefer to think that anti-Semitism had been defeated, with the defeat of Nazi Germany. Anti-Semitism has simply found a new way to morph into contempt for the Jewish state. And anyone who feels the strong affiliation to Israel and whose is stronger than the Holocaust survivors and their families is a racist. We are not the racists. The simplistic inversion of the truth serves the Jew haters very well. As we remember Kristallnacht of 1938, when the world abandoned us, we now stand before the horrors and consequences of October 7th, virtually alone. But we have some important friends, and we have some defenders of Israel's right to exist. So as Elie Wiesel of blessed memory reminds us, Jews have every reason to despair, but we cannot, we must not, for we are commanded to hope. This evening of remembrance together offers a moment of hope for all of us.